Anyone who reads PC's blog.
All right, we're live.
This guy.
Hello,
Yes.
and more people are joining. Okay, that's all good.
Hello.
All right, so hello everyone. So the idea here is we've heard a lot of nonsense about coronavirus and how to respond to that and all that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to take a few minutes here today where our distinguished panel will provide information that they have about how do you deal with misinformation in public? How do you talk about this sort of thing? So just to get it started, let me see if I'm going to share screen here. So where? I have so much stuff. Oh, it's got to be here somewhere. Uh-oh. Just a second. Yes, I wanted this to go smoothly, which means, of course, that I get all, oh, there we are. Okay, let's try this again. So I just grabbed a few clips and thought I would share those. Okay.
Oh, cool, fancy.
It's shown up a newspaper article on screen.
Yes. Yeah,
like
because
sharing some stuff with us on screen. And
this kind of highlights our problem that there's the President of the United States. And as you all know, this week he was talking about treating people with bleach, disinfectants, shining sunlight into their bodies somehow. So this is the problem we have, is this kind of nonsense gets spread at the highest levels of government. Furthermore, where these ideas come from? Well, they're getting spread all over the place. This is a nice article from Digby where she talks about the Republican policies and how awful they have become. And this is a scene, let's see, is this in Michigan? I think this was in Michigan, where we had protesters being confronted by nurses and doctors and other medical professionals. And I'll include a link below this video later, but it includes a video of these people just screaming at the top of their lungs and honking their horns at these calm professional people who are trying to prevent people from doing really stupid things. So yeah, that's a problem. These people are everywhere.
Jamie.
But here's the other thing is, you know, sometimes it's, in some ways it's really unfair to pick these extremist, ignorant people as the face of the opposition, because a lot of what's going on is like this. This is a photo of a restaurant in Texas where they lifted all the restrictions on public meetings. And what happens? All these people rush in to take advantage of that. And I kind of sympathize with it, because I would love to be able to just go out somewhere like a nice restaurant right now, but I know better. I'm not going to do that. Yet here they are. So, you know, when we talk about the screaming fanatics, that's one group. When we talk about the Republican leadership, that's another group. But then there's other, I don't know, maybe these people are all screaming fanatics too, but they look fairly normal. And they're completely ignoring any social distancing requirement. So that's a problem. These are the people we should be trying to reach, right? Forget the screaming fanatics, forget Donald Trump. They're hopeless. But how do we educate the general public about
I would
this?
prefer if you didn't do it. That's not a thing.
Okay, and I want to mention this one article that takes a very positive approach on it. So this is from David Nywert. Does everyone know David Nywert? He's very well known. He's been documenting the far right movements and the militia movements in Western Washington state, well, all across the Pacific Northwest for quite a few years. And he's talking about an antidote to this problem. This isn't the only possible solution, but I thought I'd end my little introduction on a positive note. So what he points out is that if you look at the people at the Malheur Refuge who took over and were just trashing things, all in the name of liberty, they said, when you look at the communities around there, they were uniformly despised. People hated this right-wing militia that was moving in. And he points out that the reason was, let's see, he's got a good section here. That the community was interested in collaboration with the government. They didn't see confrontation as a useful approach to dealing with these fanatics. And what he said is they were invested in collaboration because they felt it gives them influence on public land and resource issues, including forest health initiatives, etc. The same land the Bundys occupied for 41 days. So the whole point was that we want to recruit other people to join with us and work together. Part of that is, in science communication, spreading good information, but it's also avoiding alienating your neighbors, which it's all too easy to do, and having specific plans that incorporate all the people in your community to deal with this issue. So, I think that's a positive way to look at it. I'm hoping we can come up with some reasonable solution along the same lines. There will be other solutions proposed, I'm sure, but that's just the way it's got to be. But we got to think positively about how we're going to overcome these problems. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you guys. Tell me, what's the answer?
It strikes me, and in some ways, it's the same problem as trying to get things done
Stop touching the
away from the
No,
poli-
you need to stop touching.
No, you need to shush. I'm not messing you up.
So, we're talking about the coronavirus misinformation, but it's kind of the same thing as dealing with other things that have a political
Hey,
tint
please,
to them
are
anymore.
you stop anything quiet down, sweetie?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that I dealt with for many years with creationism, right? How are we going to cope with that? And we never came up with an answer. We just kept plugging away. But it's the same situation here.
I think it may be, can you hear me?
Almost.
There we go.
This is Abe. I don't have a camera, sorry.
It's okay.
I think the model that might work best would be the efforts to get people to wear seat belts. Because I've run into a lot of people who have a bizarrely large chip on their shoulder when it comes to things like wearing seat belts or, other sort of mild inconveniences that influence general public survival. I mean, nothing's quite analogous to this because, massive global plague, but it's somewhere between seatbelts and vaccines, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. When I was a kid, my family didn't bother with seatbelts for so many years, but this was in the early 60s. And then the campaigns started working and telling everyone, it really helps to have your seatbelt. And here's this horrible accident occurred where people died and they would have been saved if they wore the seatbelts. And my family changed practically overnight to my parents telling all the kids to buckle up. So Yeah, that would be great. So more education, but just to be the naysayer here, you mentioned vaccination. Vaccination is another thing we all took for granted for so many years. And look what's been happening lately. These anti-vaxxers are just making ludicrous arguments and these selfish Me Too sort of claims that just undercut the whole thing.
So we need to find ways to break through bubbles in some sense, because the anti-vaxxers are reinforcing each other, and they're talking to each other. They're not talking to us so much. So
Yeah.
how do you get to people that don't want to listen to you?
I mean, I think this is one of those things where the people who are in charge kind of make a big difference. Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Katie, you can say something if you want to.
I think a good point to remember when I'm talking to people like anti-vaxxers and that is that the opinions they have, they genuinely believe. So it's a good idea to sort of think why they think that, and sort of think of what it's like to think that, and sort of see things from their point of view, because it's like I can understand and reason with why someone would be scared of a lot of different things. And to understand that can really help stop things like anti-vax movements.
Yes, that I agree, in that one of the things we want to avoid is alienating people we're trying to recruit to our side. There's, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's always people who are just far up on the fringe with conspiracy theories and all that. They're unreachable. And so we shouldn't be flailing about trying to bash them. We should instead be focusing on the ones in between who are willing to consider our ideas and try to recruit them. Yes, that's a good point.
I'm sort of wondering. I'm still adjusting to the differences between the way this sort of thing was handled back when I was living in the U.S. and the kinds of messaging I'm getting now as a newly transplanted to Scotland. And I know the NHS has been a constant presence in my social media and in my wife's Spotify playlists. And I don't honestly know how much of an impact that has had on, if you look at the crowds, for example, that have been showing up at beaches in the US versus the crowds that were showing up, for example, in Southern England, and in Brighton and the like. And I mean, for quite a while, the times I started my own quarantine a while before the sort of official lockdown order came, after Boris Johnson realized that he had maybe made a rounding error when it came to his whole herd immunity strategy. And there was a period where it was very surreal to sort of be like, oh, this seems like a really big deal and we should all be sheltering in place. And then I'd go out to like make a withdrawal so I could pay my rent, and there were just people everywhere, as though it wasn't an issue. And I don't honestly know, because I haven't really been out, I don't know to what degree all of the sort of the public service announcements and the like have actually had an effect or not.
Yeah, I haven't seen much in the way of public service announcements here. And similarly, when I go out, even now, like once a week or once every 2 weeks, I have to go to the grocery store. And when I go there, people are still wandering around without masks, chatting in the aisles. They have signs all over the grocery store now that say, only one person per family and stuff like that. But people aren't taking it very seriously. And part of it is that we're out here in rural Minnesota and there have been 0 cases reported in our county. So I think that means that a lot of people are not taking it at all seriously yet. So we just got to get more people dying, and maybe they will. No, I don't think that's a solution.
I mean, I think that will have an effect. I was listening to the Majority Report on YouTube a few days ago, and they were saying that the pattern always seems to be that there's always, these things always have a couple waves. So there will be the first wave, and then a second wave, and sometimes a third wave. And somebody was saying, nobody really knows exactly why it is that throughout history that has always been the pattern. And I think we're seeing why that is, unfortunately, is that people are having just very strange sort of psychological reactions to it. They're having different levels of belief. As we were talking about with the anti-vaxxers, and there's the whole sort of, well, we have to get back to normal as soon as possible. So, fewer people are getting infected now. So let's go back and everything's going to be fine. And then, of course, wave 2 hits. And
Yep.
it's
As
a
soon
little
as the numbers
discouraging.
start to go down, people let their guard down and they start thinking, oh, everything's okay, we'll just go back. But it's when it starts to decline is not when you're done. You got to wait till it gets way down here. And people are so impatient that they don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think the having a personal experience or at least something nearby makes all the difference. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas. We've had a few cases, no deaths yet. And people are doing pretty well here. And I was just at the grocery store today and everybody had masks on. So I think Catherine Hayhoe's approach on climate change is applicable. Basically, she tries to find common ground where people know that climate's changing and it affects them. And if she can make the connection in a sympathetic way, then she can bring them around slowly.
Yes.
I think the whole thing with COVID and people wanting to go out is pretty much in a different category from the whole thing with anti-vax, because there's this huge element of self-interest. People want to be able to go out and resume normal life and open their shops and go to other shops and so forth. And so, they're believing that that's okay because they want to believe that's okay. And I think it just has very little to do with being misled or being confused by the science. They're just shutting their eyes to what inconveniences them, which is knowledge that actually it's safe for everyone if they stay inside. And also there's a huge element of not caring about other people's lives, sadly. That is not the case for everyone who wants to go out, but for a lot of people.
Because it's like, I know personally, I really want to go outside right now, but I don't, because that's not very safe at all.
Yeah, and so people have an unrealistic expectation of the safety of gathering in groups right now. And so like I said earlier, I can sympathize with people wanting to go out to a restaurant right now. That would be great. I wouldn't have to fix dinner tonight, but no, that's not going to happen. So
I posted a link in the chat. If you haven't seen the Lincoln Project's latest ad, it's brutal. I don't know if it'll convince anybody, but it feels good.
yeah, the Lincoln Project is this effort by, the calm, rational, not so far out Republicans to oppose the terrible policies that are being implemented right now. And yeah, I'm in a rough one there because I have learned to despise Republicans so much. Okay, so there are a few out there who are seeing the error of their ways and trying to get away from the Trumpish influence. Good for them. Yeah. So that's another group I wouldn't want to alienate. Let's encourage them to keep putting pressure on the rest of their party. Yeah, but a couple of other points that were made. So, it's pretty clear that a lot of the opposition is not going to be persuaded by science, right? We would love to just dump all this empirical data on them and tell them, here's a graph and it shows exactly what we need to do and explain this, and they are totally resistant to it. And part of that is because, I don't know about the UK, but the American educational system is really bad. It has a lot of big, deep cracks in it that let bad ideas to proliferate and propagate for generation after generation. So that's one problem. And the other is, this is not something that you can just simply science away. We got to pay attention to those emotional, social sorts of things and address those to end the problems. There is a face appearing on the screen. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is also, once upon a time, I attempted to have political discussions with my landlord when I was back in Somerville. And my landlord there is basically Somerville's version of Trump.
Stop it, it's unmuted.
He and his brother, between them, own something like 70 rental units throughout Somerville. And the family owns like a small newspaper. They're constantly clashing with the Curtatone family that has sort of been the major power player in Somerville for a long time. And the guy has a Trump sticker on all of his vehicles, and he puts all of his effort into underpaying everybody who works for him. And he's really, like, the parallels between him and Trump are just really breathtaking. And I had attempted a few times, mostly before the 2016 election, to reason with this fellow because, you know, he had a great deal of power in my life as my landlord, and he had that similar sort of. He put a lot of effort into avoiding any kind of direct confrontation. But one of the things that came out at one point was just that the only times he's not watching Fox News is when he's in his car and has right-wing radio on. And so it's not just that it's certain people are kind of, it was what was mentioned before about, you know, breaking into the anti-vaxxer bubble. And there are certain people who are kind of swimming in a sea of confirmations of how they understand the universe and influence and propaganda, for lack of a better word. And so any conversation they might have with, you know, a left-wing whack job like me is going to be just sort of a blip in the midst of all of that. And so, and then like everything else they hear is all of the different ways in which I can be safely ignored. And so it was sort of, I really don't know what the answer is to dealing with that. And like, I have my problems with aspects of the British media, and with, you know, some things that I've seen from the BBC and the Guardian. They're both a little to the right of where I am, maybe a little more than a little. But it is just nothing like what at least it doesn't seem to be anything like the degree that I encountered when I was in the US, of just this constant saturation in as far right and sort of pro-corporate libertarian as we can possibly get at all times. And I really don't know how to deal with that in a constructive way, at least not in a sort of, other than, you know, like the people who deprogram KKK members or neo-Nazis who form personal relationships with people and talk them out of it over a period of years. And that's not an effective way to deal with the current situation.
Well, there is a way to deal with it, though. I mean, we had it in the 1960s and 70s, and that was we had federal regulations that said, you know, you had to give equal time to multiple points of view if you were running this kind of public channel, whether it's right-wing radio or radio in general or television or whatever. There were a whole bunch of rules that said you couldn't just air one point of view. And then Ronald Reagan came along, and these laws got thrown out. All the regulations got thrown out, and then things like Clear Channel buys up huge blocks of media all over the place, and pretty soon that's all you've got. So yeah, I would like to see some restoration of those fair use, equal time sorts of laws on things like radio and television. It only makes sense, except if you're a rich capitalist. It's hard to talk a capitalist out of being a capitalist.
What? There are problems with capitalism? I've never heard such a thing.
Unbelievable, I know. You know, and here I've been soaking in this stuff all my life, and it's just as I got older, I started thinking, oh, there are some problems here. Even though I'm part of the privileged class and I can just coast along, you know, I can't help but notice that there's an awful lot of people who are getting screwed over by the landlords or the people who run pharmaceutical companies or the government or whatever.
They're just not pulling hard enough on their bootstraps.
Oh yeah. Yes. And then there's all those people who don't understand that the whole bootstrap metaphor is nonsense. Because you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's the whole point of the metaphor.
Conspiracy.
Yeah, even if you could, who made the boots for you in the first place, right?
Yep.
So it's more like an appeal to emotion. Yeah. So we need to find ways to appeal to make things appeal to people's self-interest. And you'd think that the threat of a global pandemic would have a lot of people's self-interests firmly in mind. And yet they
would, and I think they are. I mean, all the polls I have seen have shown that something like 70-80% of the public actively despise those protesters who are out demanding that everything open up. So, in the court of public opinion, we win already. But the problem is that the other side has bullhorns and they're not paying attention to anyone else, and they're shouting everyone down or suppressing votes or whatever it takes to get their minority viewpoint enshrined in the halls of power.
Well, I think there are a couple things. First of all, I see and appreciate the little sock puppetry going on there. But there are a couple points I want to make. One is on the issue of self-interest. While I think that's valid, I think that there's ground to be gained in there's ground to be gained on the issue of human nature. I think Thought Slime has done a fair amount with this, the YouTuber. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of something I've mentioned in I think it was Margaret Mead who said that in her view the first sign of human civilization was an adult with a long-heeled broken femur. Because one of the hallmarks of civilization is caring for others when they cannot fend for themselves. And if you have a broken femur, you are not able to hunt, gather, or get water for yourself until that's healed. And that is longer than you can go without food or water. And so you need to have somebody who is willing to do all of that for you until you can function again. And I think that part of the sort of miasma of capitalist propaganda is in declaring human nature to be defined by the greediest of us and our sort of most aggressive and competitive instincts, and teaching people over and over again from an early age that humans are fundamentally evil and sinful creatures.
Really weren't contributing to the discussion.
Sorry?
Hello,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Yeah?
We've
Yes.
vanished from the screen. Can people still see us?
Yeah.
Yes, we can now. You blinked for a moment.
Right,
but
I
you're
got
back.
it. Sorry. Okay, we can chalk up again.
Well, so I think that there's ground to be gained in sort of making the case rather than just appealing to the, these are the facts of the situation and you guys should science better, which I know that's not actually what everybody's saying people should do, but
Yeah.
comedic simplification. There's also a case to be made that I think we ought to be making right now about the degree to which people are willing to just reflexively pull together. And there's all of the stories that have been going around about people making masks and all of the mutual aid work that I've been trying to promote. The other part of it is that I think that we need to view the situation we're in right now as a general strike that has been forced upon the public. And I think this applies across the English-speaking world. I think it applies across the capitalist world, but not everybody's dealing with it the same way. But particularly in the US right now, the capitalist class is kind of engaging in strike breaking. And the working classes aren't really tuned into that for the most part. And so while the number of people protesting to get back to work is pretty small, a lot of them do have genuine concerns. And so like I have a friend on Facebook who I think runs something like a barbershop or a salon or something, and is very concerned about what's going to happen to this business that she's poured her life into, because, she is also stuck in this system. And while she is a capitalist in a very small sense, in term, she has capital, she has a business. She's not one of the people pulling on the levers of power. She's one of the people given lip service by those pulling on the levers of power. And what they're doing right now is they're attempting to starve people out and force them back to work by strategic incompetence and slow walking aid and all of this other stuff. And a lot of the sort of the reaction that we're seeing from people is the same as you see when a group tries to organize a strike in a large workforce and not everybody's on board because, my daughter's sick and I need to pay for the medicine for that. And, my husband can't work right now because he threw his back out on the construction site. And so if we don't, we might like the idea of everybody staying in, but that's not realistic because we're all going to die. And I think that is a sort of material part of it. It's similar to some of the weird concerns that anti-vaxxers have, where like, there is reason to be suspicious of the pharmaceutical industry. That's valid. That's the valid part. They, as Rebecca Watson often points out, one also ought to be suspicious of the alternative medicine industry. And, but like there are real concerns here that are driving this, and all good propaganda has at least one tendril anchored in some form of truth. And because there's not broader awareness of class consciousness, and I mean, I'm not saying, Marx is the answer to everything or anything like that, but I think part of the reason I've been plugging the mutual aid concept so much on my blog is that there's a degree to which the US is really an oligarchy, and they don't want people to be able to make ends meet without work. And so we have to figure out a way to sort of address the material end of things as well. And I mean, a lot of people on the beach are not people who are suffering economically. They're just people who are have never really had to sacrifice in their lives, and that's, you know, that's nice for them. But it is a thing that's sort of difficult to get around, and some of that I think is starting to sink in as some of those people get sick and try to get their message out, being like, hey, yo, I was stupid, don't be like me.
Mhm.
But I think that that material concern is one that needs to be addressed in some way, and the government has, the people who are in charge of it right now have a very big interest in not addressing it.
Yeah, well, you know, I agree. I think there's kind of a philosophical barrier there in the United States, in particular, that, you know, Americans seem to think that competition is everything and cooperation is a problem, when the reverse is actually a better argument to make. But I like your idea that this idea that what's going on right now is widespread strike busting by vested interests who don't, that's the whole point of forcing us to go out. Even if we die, it's to make sure the money keeps flowing into those capitalist enterprises. Of course, one way around that is beyond the philosophical. We'd have to start thinking about some material changes, like a real social safety net in this country. And I don't see people exactly rushing to embrace that, that's for sure.
Well, and I think it's similar to how, at least in America, like the UK at least has a nominal Labour Party, although recent events have indicated that they've got some internal conflicts about whether or not they ought to actually serve labor interests.
Mhm.
But in the US, anytime anybody talks about so-called redistributive programs, or as Professor Wolf would call it, pre-distributive programs, it's called class warfare. And I think people have begun to realize that class warfare has been going on all along. And I think that kind of realization is sort of what precedes the realization that we are in fact in a strike and strike breaking situation right now, at least in a certain sense. And sort of it's the same kind of thing where, like, the capitalist class is always pulled together. They have pooled their resources. They act collectively in a lot of ways. They act in solidarity with each other in a lot of ways, and sometimes it's really disturbing to see. And they sort of act like they have class consciousness, and that might just be because of the amount of power they have at their fingertips. They don't need to have, you know, a union to exert power. But they're sort of, they are acting as though they're part of an organized labor struggle, while the other side is busy pretending that we're all, you know, temporary embarrassed millionaires.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, when you talk about labor, that's one of the great disappointments, I think, of the last half century. Is we used to have a Democratic Party that was strongly focused on labor. And no, Democratic Party does not care about labor at all anymore. They don't seem to be focusing on any of those issues. So what do? It's like the UK Labor Party seems to be getting tied up in all kinds of internal dogfighting, and it's just, I think that just serves the moneyed interests and not the people.
Which seems to be the point.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder or hope that this situation will cause people to reconsider some things, like where their health care comes from, how it's paid for, the importance of safety nets. We'll see.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's just ridiculous that we have put insurance companies in charge of distributing healthcare.
Oh, and tied health insurance to employment.
Yes, because none of those things, you know, employers and the insurance companies don't really care about your health. They just want to make money off of you.
Right.
So we've got a conflict of interest there that just keeps propagating. And Yeah, this is one of the things that's made me very disappointed to see Biden getting close to the nomination. Is I think he's in the pockets of the insurance companies. Why should he
Yeah.
bother helping anyone else?
Yeah, so Kansas had a mail-in ranked choice voting for the primary, Democratic primary. So even though they had both dropped out, my first and second choices were Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. It was a pleasure to vote for them.
Yeah.
And I did cast a third place vote for Biden, but not enthusiastically.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
won't
we don't
matter.
have ranked choice voting here, but yeah, we did. That would have been our choices. We went out and voted for Warren. Or no, Biden. I'm not Bernie, excuse
Bernie.
me. So we voted for Bernie, and we still have Bernie signs posted on our house. Not that it will do much good, but
I had a Warren sign, but we had a huge windstorm a couple weekends ago, and I didn't pay attention, and it was gone.
Well, I will say,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add in. It's been pointed out that Bernie is still on the ballot, and that depending on how many delegates he gets, even if we continue with Biden all the way through, if Bernie gets a large enough lump of delegates, that will enable him to influence some things for the future of the Democratic Party and the next primary, as he was able to influence this primary by staying on the ballot until the convention in 2016. For all, some people thought that was, solely to blame for Clinton's loss or her electoral victory, whatever. It did mean that he was able to influence the rules of the primary. And as it stands, it's not clear whether he will be able to his campaign will be able to have anybody at the table there at this year's convention. But if he gets enough votes, that'll be one lever that the left can pull on in the U.S.
Yeah, that's the hope, is that he has some influence on the direction we take. And hello, Scott Lohman. I see you just joined us.
Hello. How are you?
We're doing fine. Well, are we? I don't know. We've been sitting here moaning about the current situation, but
we've been moaning in a positive fashion, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think there is still hope. I mean, whether it's Bernie pushing the Democratic Party in a more leftward direction, or if it's more outreach to people to get them to accept the policies we need to end the pandemic, there are things we can do. It's just going to be hard work all the way. No easy solutions.
But isn't the whole Bernie, Biden, Warren dynamic, isn't that really kind of the heart of what this is all about? I mean, at some point I think you've called it, holding your nose and pulling the lever for, for Hillary or for Biden or whatever.
What's going on?
The ideological purity just isn't going to cut it with the election, isn't going to cut it with the virus. It isn't going to cut it with anything. We're going to have to work with people we don't want to.
Yep.
I think that's always been people have talked a lot about, at least in the circles I move in, people have talked a lot about how we need to sort of rediscover the values of community. And one of the big things with community is that a lot of the sort of the entire structure has largely been centered around where you live and the people around you, which means that no community is made up entirely of people that you like. And every story about any community has always had a great number of people who everybody seems to hate. And yet, when there's a fire, everybody joins the bucket brigade, because nobody wants the barn to burn down or whatever. But I think part of it with holding one's nose and voting for Biden, I don't feel like I can tell somebody who's a sexual assault survivor and believes that Biden is a rapist that they have to vote for him. I'm not in a position where I can try to shame somebody into that. Likewise, I don't think somebody who lost someone because they couldn't afford health care is necessarily morally obligated to vote for somebody who said that he's going to veto efforts at universal health care. But I do think that it would be easier to reconstruct the labor movement that was sort of stamped out during the Cold War and the socialist movement that was stamped out during the Cold War under a Biden presidency than under whatever nightmare a second term of Trump would turn into. Which, you know, the longer this term goes on, the worse that looks. And I think the more people are going to be trying to just cope with life and desperate to get back to some sense of sanity. And so they're not necessarily going to have the energy to put into joining organizations, learning what it means to be part of an organization. I'm still figuring that out. I don't know. I've never been part of a union. And you know that, and I just want to say on the universal healthcare thing, I see lots of arguments from people saying, oh well, it's not that great, and you know the NHS has problems, and that's nice, but having sort of spent a while as a low-income person in the US and now being a low-income person in Scotland, the NHS has been a miracle. Holy crap. Like it has been phenomenal. And you know it's not perfect. Like if I want physical therapy, you know, assuming there wasn't a plague on, I'd have to wait 6 months to get it through the NHS or something like that. But that was for a very minor issue. And like I got shingles, which the longer it goes without treatment, the worse it can get. And I called them. I said, hey, I think I might have shingles. They called me in the same day, gave me antiviral meds the same day. And I didn't pay a cent for it because I had already paid up front. And, you know, I went in to get antidepressants. And it was, you know, the day after I called in, I went in, I had a conversation with the doctor, and I went home with meds that have been largely responsible for my ability to be a somewhat functional blogger over the last month. And, you know, I'm very grateful for that when it comes to dealing with this lockdown and everything. And it makes a huge difference. So, like, yeah, the NHS is not perfect. I think it should have a lot more funding than it does. And no system is going to be perfect, but wow, can it be better than what the US has? And Massachusetts is not bad off by American standards. But the fact that there's an argument just shows how, well, you all know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of it is that, you know, people like me who've got tenure and are nicely employed and have good health insurance, it's so easy for us to look the other way and say, well, what's the problem? I get all my health care easily. And yeah, that just doesn't work for a lot of people. I've got, you know, good employment, so I'm fine, but not everyone does. I know my son, when several years ago, he had serious toothaches and he was uninsured, and there's no way you're going to get dental care at a reasonable price if you're not insured. And I think we ended up paying for some of his dental work just to get him over this problem, and that just doesn't work for everybody.
Well, I just want to add one thing, and then I'll shut up for a bit. But I grew up with good health insurance. My father works at a science education nonprofit that I myself worked at for a few years, and through that, we always had really good insurance. And so, like when I spent 4 months in Tanzania, I had Malarone, which is, you know, in the U.S. without insurance, it's $5 a pill, and it's a daily pill. And you know, I ended up getting malaria anyway, so you know, there's that. But I had good insurance, and when I left that company, I had the option to go with Cobra. My rent in Somerville was $1,400 a month, which was really good for Somerville for a 2-bedroom apartment. Cobra, for that health insurance plan, would have cost me $1,800 a month. having just lost my job. And
Yep.
so when I hear Biden talking, or the people in the Democratic Party talking about expanding Cobra, like it zaps my mind straight to Nancy Pelosi with her two $20,000 fridges talking about her chocolate ice cream collection. Speaking of political malpractice. All right, I'm done ranting for a bit.
Yeah, no, I felt the same thing growing up because I grew up in Seattle and my father was a mechanic, and we saw this boom and bust cycle all the time. When Boeing was hiring, he would get a job there, and instantly all of us kids would get bundled up and taken off to the dentist and the doctor and get our vaccinations and our teeth fixed up. And then because of the way Boeing works, you know, a year later, he's laid off. And then we're you know, scrimping pennies to get by. And no, you don't get to go to the dentist this year. Maybe once dad gets reemployed, but not now. That was no way to live. Yeah. I came out of it hating Boeing, so.
I hope this isn't too tangential, but it kind of reminds me of something I dealt with a few years ago. I had to take my folks out to an Army hospital quite a bit. My dad was a retired military. So I remember I was sitting in the lobby at one of the clinics waiting for him one day, and there's this fellow standing next to me. He's obviously he was a pilot, I believe, Air Force pilot. And there was something on the TV. They loved showing Fox News over there, which was just lovely. And they're talking about Obamacare. And this is going to ruin us, blah, blah, blah. And this fellow turned to me and said, well, you know, we just can't have socialized medicine. It doesn't work. And I'm thinking to myself, there isn't a better example in the United States of a socialized medicine program than the military medical program. And this guy is going there. He's not paying a cent for any of his medical care, and nor is his family. And it's not the greatest healthcare in the world, but I think what you were saying about the NHS, Abe, they jump on important things pretty darn quick, you know. And it was kind of a shock to me that here's somebody who's benefiting from the exact thing that he's decrying.
Well, that's the way it works. If it benefits you, it's not socialism. If it benefits some other person, that's socialism. It's us versus them again. Okay, anybody else want to speak up? A few more minutes, then we'll have to shut her down. Eric, you haven't said anything.
Katie, stop it. Right, I feel like this is supposed to be this whole positive, let's look for actual ways we can change people's minds about science and anti-science and stuff. And it's turned into everyone wearily ranting about how awful the current political state of the world is. Which,
I mean, they're not wrong, but
yeah, okay, I think Jake said it there. They're not wrong, but I feel like we've kind of got off purpose. And is there anything sort of positive we can say about how to actually, you know, change people's minds, even if it's on an individual basis rather than, I mean, yeah, we're not going to change the minds of the hardcore minority who are just convinced that you know, vaccines are all a plot by big pharma and scientists are busy trying to put more autism in vaccines. Katie cannot helping. Anyway, I just wondered if it goes on any sort of positive suggestions or anything, since that was what the program is meant to be about.
Yeah, well, I think there's been some of that. It's just so easy to get caught up in the griping. But yeah, you know, I think one of the lessons is communities and cooperation, that we can't continue to just stand back and let the other side organize and infiltrate and take over institutions. That we need to do more of that kind of community building on our own side. And
Mm.
yeah,
Well,
you know,
Thank
this
you.
David
Remember,
Nyward
the
article
people are
also makes
people.
the point that, you know,
That's a good
the other
point.
side is really good at exploiting our
Exactly.
weaknesses.
Good job.
So for instance, these recent protests, they're doing this mostly unopposed because the rest of us are listening to the informed opinions of doctors who say, no, don't go out there and protest, stay home. So we stay home. They get out, get all the media attention, get the cameras focused on them, and make a lot of noise. So they are a small community, but they're effective at getting their voices heard. And
they've got the advantage there,
yeah,
but can we all remember there's so much you can do even at home to influence your political representatives in terms of writing, telephoning. You can do those things from home. They do make a difference if you're letting the people who represent you know that you know your goodwill come voting time is going to be dependent on what decisions they make about these things. That makes a difference to them, even if you're not out on the streets with a megaphone shouting it.
And remember to provide
yes,
evidence.
And remember to provide evidence. That's a good one. But I think
yes,
for people you're trying to convince, you know, getting back to the whole how do you convince the people who don't believe in vaccines or don't believe in staying at home or whatever, evidence is a good thing for those people. For influencing political people, I think a lot of it does come down to who you are or aren't going to vote for. But yes, evidence is also good. Evidence gives them things to draw upon if they're trying to speak up for you in well, in our case Parliament, in your case Congress or whatever.
yeah. Yeah, and also acting locally, I think, is a key part of the strategy. So for instance, here we've got a little group here that's been busy lobbying our local
Yay.
representatives who are horrible Republicans, but that's just the way it is. But we let them know that, you know, we're not going to vote for you if you do X and Y. That we need women's clinics kept open. We need to do something about, you know, the environmental degradation going on in rural areas. There's a whole bunch of things we pester them about. And I think the more of us who get together and do that, the more effective we are.
Well, I think
Very,
that
very true.
living, you know, like being ready right now is the most important, because it's about losing a battle to win the war. Like at this moment, when people don't realize how COVID can affect them, they will go to the beaches, they will try to reopen. When they get sick, when their family members start to die, they will start changing their minds. And I say we need to be alert, but at this moment, I'm afraid we have to wait for them to see what will be the cause of their actions.
Yeah,
Well,
that's kind of the harsh way to look at it is, yeah, let's let them suffer the consequences.
yeah,
Well,
Unfortunately, when
terrible
they
battle
suffer,
to
we suffer
yeah.
too.
I think there are actions that we can take following on from what Eric said. Just sort of going to the sort of list of things one can do. There's contacting representatives. I'm increasingly leaning towards the theory that at least the leadership in the Democratic Party doesn't particularly care whether or not they win. And while I don't think that it's a good idea to then give up on electoral politics, I think that finding a group, so like a few times I've plugged the International Marxist Tendency as trying to build sort of a workers of the world thing. But finding a group to join that is working on organized action is important. But with regard to what Eric was talking about, with these various people, they're going to sort of reap what they have sown in the coming months. And one way to sort of use those cracks in their armor is getting back to the mutual aid concept thing, so that if we can join and support groups locally and nationally and globally that are engaged in providing material aid and information and support where the capitalist infrastructure is failing to do so. That's a way that you can sort of, it's similar to like what Foundation Beyond Belief does, which is sort of showing or earning people's ear by being a source of help when they need it, insofar as we're able. And so that ranges all from contributing to mutual aid efforts if you can, or boosting them if you can't. It of course includes giving to your amazing left-wing bloggers and going to their Patreon pages and giving them money because they need to pay rent.
Good plug. Glad you said that. Yeah.
But well, they need to pay for frivolous lawsuits too, apparently.
Oh yeah.
But I think a lot of it is just sort of a lot of the big changes that have happened in society over the last few hundred years have happened because people got together and formed movements and organized. And particularly in America, all of that got squished and kind of went away for a long time. And so FDR didn't just magically come up with the New Deal. He was pushed into it in part by the threat of a left-wing revolution. Because there was a very powerful labor movement and a very powerful socialist movement in the United States at that point in time. And whether or not they were able to make the United States a socialist country, they were able to, there was an implicit threat there, similar to how, Gandhi shutting down India nonviolently. Like, yeah, sure, that did some things, but mainly what it did was it showed the level of mass organization and mass action that they were able to bring to bear. And I think that the biggest thing we can do is to try to build that kind of organized power outside of the governmental systems. And right now, there's a lot of people just sitting at home who don't know a whole lot about it. And yeah, I agree on the sock puppet. I've been enjoying that.
Yeah, if we had to be invaded by sock puppets, that's the right kind.
So yeah, I think part of the direct action thing is like learn what it means to be in a labor organization. I'm doing reading on my own on that. I can't really teach anybody anything about that, but there are people who do know, and like look for organizations near you and join them and pay dues if you can, and share information about that around and say, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we had an organized left-wing movement that could put pressure on people? Wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be useful coming out of all this? So there's my plug.
Yep. Well, yeah, and years ago when people still invited me to atheist conferences, that's often the kind of, I was always talking about mutual aid and Kropotkin and cooperation. I think it might be part of the reason they stopped inviting me. But in those kinds of atheist meetings, there's an awful lot of people who would rather listen to the survival of the fittest monologue of somebody like Richard Dawkins than me. And so that's another problem, is people like to hear the feel-good stories that are about benefiting them, not necessarily about benefiting others.
Well, you definitely played a role in my radicalization,
Oh,
as well as
good.
my departure from religion. Because when I started reading you, I was a pretty devout Quaker, but interested in evolution. And I have sort of broken with that part of my history to a degree, and you were somewhat influential in that.
Well, good. But although if you had to be any religion at all, Quakers is not bad.
Yeah, most of them are good people.
Yeah, it's not like you were a Catholic.
Quakerism does have a religious right, mostly not in the United States, but a little bit there, and it can be deeply surreal to be in a Quaker megachurch in Kenya with fire and brimstone about the evils of homosexuality. That was an eye opener, to be sure. Although they're progressing. I keep a lot of my friends are still from the Quaker community, and mostly very left wing, because I'm from the northeast of the U.S. and my father's still a recorded minister, and very, very active within that community, while also being a force for science education and a left-wing influence on me. So all in all, I got pretty lucky when it comes to religion, honestly. But it's an interesting phenomenon. Anyway, sorry, sidetracked.
No, it's all good. Yeah, but we should wrap it up here because it's been over an hour, and I was just looking over at the YouTube comments. Hello, people. I see you out there. And we've been neglecting them. Looking to see if there's anything crucial. Oh, somebody recommended Ardea Skybreak's book on evolution. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a communist perspective on evolution, and it's pretty good. I kind of liked it.
I'll have to look for that in the comments later on.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find, but the author's name is Ardea Skybreak. It's a pseudonym. I don't know who it is, although I know a few people who probably do. And yeah, it's just a good introductory text on evolutionary history and evolutionary biology, and it comes at it from a communist perspective, which is probably the reason it didn't break the New York Times top seller list. But yeah, that's the way it is. Yeah, so people are saying hello in the YouTube comments. Okay. People are also saying that Biden sucks, but we should vote for him, which is kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, so we had a little audience here. 25 watching right now. Okay. Okay, does anybody else have anything else to say before we close up? Last call. Oh, well, thank you. I mentioned before, I'm going to try and do this like every 2 weeks or so.
Nice and therapeutic.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea, is get some people together and talk, which I don't get to do normally anymore. And we'll try it again in the future. I will post notices on the Patreon account, and I also post them on the Freethought Blogs server, so we get a nice mix of people there. And maybe we'll see you again in a few weeks.
That'd be good.
Yeah, as much notice as you can give on this will make it easier for me to.
Yeah,
join.
I will get specific about my plans and post them well in advance.
Good.
Okay, talk to you all later. It's been great.
See you later. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.